Good afternoon and welcome to the Avenue G Church of Christ podcast, video, whatever you want to call it. On today we have a continuation of the talks on race, and we have with us Western Hill's very own Scott Meyer. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, Chris. How are you today, man? Excited about all the developments in your family, new house and baby on the way, and hope all that's progressing well and wife's healthy and everything. So I'm just so excited for you, man.
Thank you. It's been a exercise doing it. I'm still doing it. So I appreciate that.
The moving part's been the exercise.
It's been a lot of exercise, yeah.
Well, good for you.
Yeah. But
I'm looking forward to our conversation today, man.
Yeah, most definitely. We had a lot of people who watched our conversation, and they were asking questions, and I was like, well, I'll go back and I'll ask the questions that you're asking, and then I'm sure Scott has no issue with talking with us, and that's where this conversation started from. And so we'll get right into it. One of the things that is on a lot of folks' mind is about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's a movement that, me personally, I don't see the head of the movement. I understand the sentiment behind the movement and why it was started because of police brutality in regards to unarmed Black people. But what I want to get was your thoughts as a minister, as a man in America. What are your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement, like its meaning to you and what you've learned about it throughout the months that we've seen it begin to progress and gain a following?
Right. Well, hey, Chris, that's a great question. And what you've done is you've asked, you have, in our previous conversations, you have really helped me understand some things with the dynamics of it. And because perhaps unknowingly, I was one of the guys who was like, yes, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. And what at least you helped me understand was that from a Black person in America's perspective, at least in that point, that moment, they're asking, yes, but I need to know if we're valid or not.
Right.
And so in some ways it was a little bit of a, hey, would you be willing to say Black Lives Matter? And when you helped me understand that I really put it in some ways like if a loved one of mine, a child, a brother, a sister, a mom, or a dad was coming to me and just saying, yeah, but do I matter to you? And my reply was, well, all my family matters to me. Yeah, but that doesn't answer but do I matter to you? And so from that, you've helped me grow and helped me see, yeah, okay, Black lives matter. And where I had no problem saying it before, but realizing that's what it needed to be heard. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Am I correct? Yeah, and so I can fully affirm that. I think there is a struggle, as you identified. There's not a head of the movement.
Yeah.
And you and I both lead churches, and one of the things that we struggle with is when somebody that comes along and says, well, I knew a member of your church, and they pick the worst possible representation of our church, and then they apply all of that onto our church. Yeah. Well, I think so much of this conversation has to do with, it struggles with, well, I knew somebody that represented the Black Lives Movement, and they were extremely radical, and they were hate-filled just as much as I wouldn't want you to pick the worst white person that you know and go, well, that's all white, white people. So I think it definitely goes, there's a struggle there, and I know you well enough as a friend to know that you don't endorse everything that everybody says that comes under that single banner, as you know that I don't endorse everything that everybody says that comes under, a white person says and that. And so, but back to your original question, all that aside, or all that, with all that understanding, I think that's one thing you've really helped me grow in, and just see is, okay, so it's no problem for me to say, yes, Black Lives Matter. Your life, matters matters to me, and I'm happy to stand firm on that.
Right. I get you. And like you were saying there, that made me think. There's a lot of things that that I don't believe, right, or don't believe in, but I think the key to being able to really embrace the meaning behind it is being open minded to all things, like like the flat earther movement. The people who believe the earth is flat. Okay, I don't believe that, but I'm willing to listen to the argument, and so I can say, okay, I get why you believe that's the case.
Sure.
And I'm willing, if there's enough facts presented, of course, I won't go too far so I don't fall off the earth. So
keep it right here in Central Texas, huh?
Right. So the second question that I want to ask, and I feel like that Western Hills is one of the leading churches in this area, in Central Texas, in this area. The second question is, how do you feel predominantly white churches can be unified with predominantly black churches? I wanted you to, that wasn't one of those questions that was asking me to ask you, but I wanted you to share that just in case somebody out there is in a predominantly white church or predominantly black church, and they're asking themselves the question in the climate that we live in currently, how can we be unified so that the world looks at the church and they see something different, something where hope is?
Well, if we're going to talk on sort of how can we help our churches be unified, how can we help in a particular location, I'm going to tell you, I don't know of a better way to start than what you and I started with, and I think we just kind of stumbled into it. We started having lunch together,
right?
And we both enjoyed going out to eat, and we both enjoyed places. And you're more of a foodie than I am, and so you were always introducing me to some new restaurant, which I was game for and up for. Well, we've heard some people, both you and I have described like, wow, you guys are really doing something phenomenal.
Right.
And I keep going, we just started with lunch. There's nothing phenomenal about lunch, and from lunch and a friendship and discussion, and we were both honest with each other. And so any kind of, or if any church were to ring my phone and say, hey, help us start the same process that you and Chris have going, or Western Hills and MG has going, I'm going to say, find, for the white pastor, find a pastor of a predominantly African-American black church and go have lunch.
Right.
And start that friendship, because if you turned me down, we wouldn't be anywhere, it would just be me trying to find another lunch date, at that point. So, but seriously, and it sounds overly simple, but one of the things I think is a theme through this, and you can hear me, is there's a lot out there in the system and the environment in our culture. But Jesus dealt with the heart of individuals.
Right.
And so when Scott, as a follower of Jesus, and Chris, as a follower of Jesus, we sat down and broke bread together and just enjoyed lunch and got to know each other, everything else got real simple after that. I mean, you and I started dreaming some dreams that I didn't think was possible. Hey, can we actually have a worship service together? And just by logistics, it was going to be one of those deals where Avenue G was going to need to be hosted over at Western Hills. And when you said, let's go for it, I thought, holy cow, we've got something here. We've actually got a possibility, because you're willing to dream the big dreams too.
Yeah.
And so I think if leadership of churches, black and white, would start with a friendship, I think the world's a friendship in Jesus, a friendship because of a fellow, a collaborative belief in the resurrected Lord, then I think anything of that's possible.
Yeah.
Because I think that's modeling gospel right there.
Yeah.
So that's how I would instruct church to begin this, because it's been funny. You and I have both gotten some questions about how you guys do this, and I don't think we had some secret plan, or I don't think we're that smart. I don't think that we kind of devise something nobody else could.
Yeah.
I think it just starts with a friendship, and from there, in many ways, you and I both represent our churches. Yeah. Whether we think we should or not, we still represent them. And when you and I started taking the steps that way, I think it was natural for our churches to do the same, or at least it gave permission for our churches to do the same.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, it starts with that willingness to have the conversation. There's a lot of phone calls that go unanswered that could be the start of something that we've seen here between our two churches.
And I'll throw this in there, Chris, too, because you and I both had the same desire. We wanted to get this off of a Facebook topic, and just a Facebook stream where everybody really ends up shouting at each other. And we really wanted to do something different than that. Now, we didn't know all what we wanted to do, but we knew we wanted to be different than that. And so, therefore, sitting down over lunch and starting the conversation that way has led over the last couple of years to what I think is really, and other people seem to think is really significant between our churches.
So, I mean, real life conversations actually work better than social media conversations.
Yes, sir. And through that, I mean, you're not paying me to say this, but through this, I developed an incredible appreciation for your ability as a preacher, your skill as a leader, a skill as a pastor, your love for the Word, your knowledge of the Word. And so there's not a time that we're not together that I'm not learning something. I'm soaking up something from you. So that's just selfishly, that's been incredibly valuable to me, and so I like hanging out with people that do that. So thank you to that.
Thank you. Now, the next question that I get this a lot because there's a lot of conversation about it, and is about white privilege. Does it exist? How can it be used to help other people who are not white? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, obviously, as you know, white privilege it's a buzzword now. It's a loaded term in lots of ways, and so there's a lot in it. So let me try to address it this way. If we're describing, when we say white privilege, we're describing that, hey, historically, if you go back historically, in beginning with issues like slavery, Jim Crow laws, things that needed to be addressed in the civil rights movement, things like that, you say, hey, there's still effects of that going on today, because things can be passed down generationally. Sure, I fully agree that there's this thing as white, as a white privilege, that we don't all start in the same spot. We don't all start in the same place. I definitely agree. Agree with that. I think a lot with, for just to say for white people, we wrestle with. Now, what do you want me to do about that?
Right.
Because we talk in terms of it's another word that goes along with white privilege, oftentimes in the same sentence you use, is called systemic racism.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about something in the system, in some ways it starts becoming very nebulous. How do I get my hands around? What do you want me to do? And so I'll go back to because your second half of your question, I think, is a very good one. Okay, if we say there's some kind of white privilege, what can I do with that? Mm-hmm. Well, I think in all forms of leadership or influence is a stewardship question. How will I steward whatever leadership, influence, resources, abilities, gifts that I have, however I came by them?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I've got a certain level of leadership influence, however I got it, because why God gave it to me, put in however I got it, then I think what I need to do is I need to steward that on behalf of others and for the benefit of others. Okay, so you and I both lead our families. Okay, so we've got a certain amount of influence, leadership in our families that we have to steward. And what do? We steward that on behalf of our families. Right. And so you care for your wife, you care for your kids, you're looking after your daughters. I've only got one daughter, thank goodness, because you've got my respect.
Yeah.
I'm working my tail off trying to figure out how to handle that one. So, yeah. But we steward that thing. Okay, so now when it comes to what can I do with my white privilege, or however I came into having a certain amount of influence, what can I do to steward on behalf of somebody else? Mm-hmm. And so, and no point in that. So I'll go back to, once again, it's a one-on-one, it's a one-to-one hearts connecting type situation. So I never had a thought that you needed me, that you needed something. But I did know that I've got a platform that's Western Hills, that God's allowed me to have some influence here, and I hope I stewarded that well. And I knew that what you had to offer would be beneficial to Western Hills.
Right.
And so I put that together. And so in some ways, I think if there's something that I've tried to steward well, and I'm not saying I have, but I know my heart is steward well, is helping reach out and say, hey, Chris, will you come talk to my church? Will you come? Because I knew then that your presence and the kind of guy that you are was going to help move my church forward in race relations.
Right.
Help move my church forward out of just a conversation on Facebook about we got to do something to actually do that. And so what I'm trying to say is I do think there's some systemic things that have been in play. Now, the question is, I can run around feeling super guilty about that, or I can steward that.
Yeah.
At least steward it on your behalf to say, hey, come do this, and then that has worked out to be incredibly well because as you've done, you've helped open the eyes of some of my congregation. We've been able to have these ongoing talks, and in some ways, you've used your platform to help broaden my horizons and the benefits you have, because I've been able to meet some other ministers that were totally off my radar.
Right.
And there's some great guys and some great blessings through our shared times together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that helpful?
I think so, man. I truly believe that wherever we are, I always tell people at the church, no matter where we are, God has placed us where we are for a reason. Like I tell folks that have issues at work, don't be in such a rush to get off that job whenever it's hard times or whenever the environment isn't what you would like it to be, because God placed you there for a purpose. There's somebody there who needs to be introduced to God, and you're the conduit for that. And, and like you said, you've played a part in mentorship and showing me things behind the scenes of how a church with a full staff works, and introduced me to people that I wouldn't never met, like Rick Ashley. I wouldn't have met him by myself. So things like that, and the conversation that I was able to have with him when we went up to his church, those things have been really beneficial in my ministry and how I help the folks at Avenue G. And I think that if we take not just white people, but if anybody just takes what they have a surplus of and help the next person,
there you go.
Because I've seen too many times. I remember working at I won't say the company, but I remember working before I got into ministry, and I saw.
And then you really started working.
Yeah, then I really started. Yeah. No 9 to 5, but 24-hour job. But I used to see a whole bunch of nepotism, right? And I would see guys in positions of power, and then they would hire their sons or their daughters to do jobs that they weren't qualified for. I'm just like, what? Why? I mean, I understand, why you want to help your family, but like, there's other people qualified who could do the job who have worked in positions lesser. Bless those people that can get the job done. And so I just think that when it comes to dealing with race in America, especially, I heard a quote from Steve Harvey, of all people, and he said slaves were not free because they wanted to be free. It took the voice of outraged white people, abolitionists, to get that thing going, and I think that we got to help each other in this. I don't think that we should. What I see also starting right now is a push for. I don't disagree with the push for Black Power, but I don't want to see us turn into what we despise and say Black only. Where we say we're better than. I think there's some sections that are starting to head that way, and I don't think that's healthy. I think that we need to learn unity. And in order for us to be unified, we have to have the same mind. And I think that can only be found in God. I don't think that can be found in being of a certain age group or a certain committee or a club. I think that being a Christian is where we can truly find unity.
And I think that's what, again, as we talk about white privilege, is I can easily acknowledge, yes, the field is never striped fair, and it's not striped fair for all kinds of different reasons. In this particular conversation, historically slavery and what the systemic thing that follows after that, I agree with. I think where the conversation goes off the road, so to speak, and is no longer helpful, is when it comes in, well, what do you want me to do about that?
Right.
And when it seems like in all the chatter in the airwaves is you need to really feel guilty about that.
Yeah.
Okay, but how does that help anybody? When I think what you and I are trying to do is we're trying to steward the opportunities that are before us into something better.
Yeah.
And leverage what we have on behalf of the other. And you've leveraged things on my behalf. I'm going to leverage things on your behalf. And I think there's where a difference is being made.
Yeah. Actions,
Yeah.
Actions.
Yeah.
Now, this last question, it pushes us towards hope. Hopefully it ends on a brighter note.
Okay.
A high note, I mean. But
I was going to say, was that not bright?
So this right here, the fifth question is, what progress have you seen within the church in regard to race? It's a two-part question. And what can be done to take it a step further?
Okay. Boy, I love this question, Chris, because this is what gets me excited about what God's doing, particularly with Western Hills and Avenue G. I grew up when I guess I don't know if you would call it racism or not, but I grew up not fully experiencing racism or even understanding that was out there.
Yeah.
But when it came to church conversation, I still went to a predominantly white church growing up. It was a very large church, but there were some white families there, but nowhere near, it was a white church. Okay. And so when I started asking questions, they were kind of having that, hey, what about some visiting a black church or whatever? And we'd go and we'd visit a black church, and it'd be an incredible experience, a predominantly black church, and be an incredible experience. And so I went, why aren't the churches together? Why is there a predominantly white church and predominantly black church? The answer always came back, because we all worship differently.
Yeah.
And everybody, so that's not outright racism, but it's still well, everybody's got their own style and preference, and therefore our style and preference is too big to overcome.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was kind of my experience growing up. And so I kind of lived with everybody's got their own preference. Everybody's got their own style. Everybody's got their own whatever. So I think that churches have come a long ways, and especially what's going on between our churches, we're learning to realize, we're at least learning to admit that's not a good enough reason to be a part.
Yeah.
The gospel is bigger than a style and a preference.
Right.
And sometimes we're using the style and preference language to mask some deeper issues.
Yes.
And so now I think we've got an opportunity to come together, and I think the times that we've been able to worship together, those are incredibly dear to me, because I don't know a place where we can express more unity than in the middle of worship, for taking the Lord's Supper together.
Right.
Because we're both coming around the same table. And if you think about the civil rights movement, there's a lot of symbolism even there, because there's white only counters, and what we're saying in that is we're declaring at this table, at the Lord's table, there are no reserved seats. There are no whites only section. We all pull up to the table only at the invitation of the King. Mm-hmm. And I really see that playing out more and more. So that gives me incredible. I gain incredible hope from, as I alluded to earlier, you've introduced me to a whole network of ministers that I'm regretfully say I just was not even aware of out there. Some black pastors that are at predominantly black churches that are just incredibly gifted and have incredible passion. And so I've thrived on them. You've introduced me to some of their preaching on YouTube channels. And I've learned and I've grown from that. I didn't know how to find them before, but there they are. And so things like that gives me great hope. And so I'm going to go back to, I want Western Hills and Avenue G, any trajectory that draws those churches closer together, whether it's some of the small groups that have happened together before, some of the showers that have occurred together, the worship times together, you and I having conversations like this, our youth groups doing something together, all of that stuff, the combined effect of that, boy, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That I see momentum growing there, and so I am passionately about that, because I know that Western Hills is better because of our relationship with Avenue G.
Yeah, likewise.
So, is that somewhat you're thinking, or tell me?
I agree. I think that, like, the progress that I've seen, I had the same type of experience whenever I was younger. I remember it was different. It was different for us. We would get the same response whenever I would ask the question about why we don't all worship together, and we've had conversations about the history of the building that we were in, and it's kind of like, okay, we'll help you build a church, but y'all go over there and we'll be over here, type of thing.
Right.
But I was blessed enough to be a part of a youth group that we had a youth minister by the name of Larry Holloman. He would have us everywhere. We didn't just go to black church events. We were at Western Hills when I was a kid. We were going to Camp K when I was a kid. We were doing all kinds of things like that. And he exposed us to different ways of worship, and it's not that any worship is less than the other. It's just like it's just done in a different way. And it's like you learn to respect that, especially from being a kid. It's like, I'm not hardened to how we do things.
Right.
I grew up in an environment to where I know that when we come together, it's even better, because it's like it's the melting pot, effect, and it was powerful for me.
One thing I think that we're overcoming, Chris, is I've never considered myself a racist. I never considered you a racist, and I don't consider the majority of my church a racist. I think what we did is we became lackadaisical.
Yeah.
We become well, I'm not racist, you're not racist, we're not known as racist. And so what we did is we allowed those things that you just described that were so influential in your childhood to slip off the radar.
Yeah.
Because planning worships together, planning times together, that's work.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to work to get that done. Not because there's tension, just because you got to put it on the calendar, you got to figure out how we're going to do it, you got to run the logistics, you got to make it happen. And so there's one thing that I think as we keep moving forward is we've, at least you and I for sure, we've put this back on the plate, on the table, and said having relations with somebody of a different color, in this case particularly black and white, there is great value there, especially what it demonstrates in the power of the gospel.
Yes.
And I think when we say this is ultimately to be an expression of the power of the gospel, then from both sides, not that you and I are at odds, but from both vantage points, we start pulling the same direction. And that gives me great hope, and I can see that having no end to it.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I think the progress, as we continue to do things like this, I think once we start melding things together, and, like you were talking about earlier with the different styles, once we meld and combine things together, and then there's a new style that comes from that, I think that will be powerful, because nobody can say, okay, this isn't what I like, this isn't what I like. this is something that this is how we do it together, unified as God's people, and not merely human beings. You know, because we look at being human beings or Americans or black or white as something to be grasped to, kind of like, you know, the Philippian hymn. But it's like, man, when we decide to be Christians first, you know, man, it's gonna be something.
Well, I have in my lifetime, I long to be a part of a church that has a diverse leadership and a diverse ministry staff ministering to a diverse congregation, and that's pretty hopeful for me there. That's what gets me going and excited. Yeah. So,
same. Well, that's all the questions that I have for today. Did you want to get the last word, or give us a prayer, or some encouragement? Sure. You can sing a song if you want to.
Well, that would not be encouraging, but I appreciate you setting me up for that one. See, you know my weaknesses. You know, this white boy can't sing, so appreciate that. Hey, I'll say this, Chris. For everybody at Avenue G and everybody sees this, I continually thank God for our friendship and what it means to me, what God's doing amongst our churches. It really is, in my opinion, it's an event going on. I get to experience some of that of the way the gospel is moving and working here locally, and I get to see it with my own eyes. And so I just appreciate you for that and making things like this possible.
Nice.
So let me pray for us.
All right.
Heavenly Father, I thank you for my friend Chris. I thank you for the Avenue G Church and all they have taught me and we experienced together as the Western Hills Church and the Avenue G Church as we work together to be co-laborers in the gospel in the kingdom that is yours. Father, as this is a conversation that's being had all kinds of ways throughout our country, I pray that you would continue to give clarity and listening ears and soft hearts, and that we would not be so quick to put up defenses, but would be listening to one another. I'm so grateful for the way that Chris models this to me, Father, and I thank you once again for him. Father, help us to live lives, help us to have churches that show that the gospel is bigger than any division and bring down those walls. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, hey, I appreciate you, brother.
Hey, thank you.